Hello coders. Hello coders. Good afternoon. It is 120. That's the episode number. Episode 120. The 21st of October 2021. And today we're going to be talking about the Apple Unleashed event. And the thing that I have purchased, but we're also going to dive into some. We've got some housekeeping to do. I've got some news to talk about PHP, and I've got some questions that I want to answer from from you guys, from the YouTube and the podcast community. So that's what we're going to do first up. So I have been working on the new howtocodewell.fm website. It's not ready yet. It's almost ready. I've had a couple of DevOpsy issues, but as I've been working on that site, I've gone through all of the previous episodes and I've tidied up the titles. I've removed the prefixes, so where it says How to Code Well podcast, and I've removed things like the EP for episode and the season number, all of those things. And I've also tidied up the ones before as well, so the earlier episodes too. So if you use the howtocodewell.fm RSS feed, then you will see a change in some of the titles of those things. So the website I'm building, it's open source, and I'm building it live on YouTube and Twitch, and it will be released in the coming few weeks, which I'm super happy about. I'll talk about it more at that point. Something I've been doing recently is I've been adding some polls to Spotify. It's a new feature. And one of the polls that I created was, have you used SVN before? Because I mentioned SVN in the previous podcast, and 100% of you, and there was quite a few of you, said no. So that means that I will not be doing any tutorials on SVN because nobody really cares about it. SVN is, for those that don't know, is a very old technology. It's how we used to use source control back in the day. Now we use Git. So I'll be putting in different polls throughout the shows where I think or touch upon a small topic, and I come away from the show thinking, well, maybe I should ask a question to the audience to see whether or not they actually know what I'm talking about, or have used the thing that I'm talking about, or actually care about the thing that I'm talking about. So we're going to dive into two portions of news, and then I've got some questions and answers to talk about, and then we're going to go and discuss about the Apple event that happened on Monday. Okay, so I've got two portions of news. The first one, they're PHP based news articles. So the first one is that the Symfony documentation has been updated. So it's the design, it's the layout, it has been updated. And my opinion is mixed. So first of all, on the positive, the homepage of the documentation looks 10 times better than it used to. The index page is far more slick, far more usable, far more readable. However, there are a few things that I have spotted, some UX issues. These kind of issues are they're really small in my opinion, and they will be things that get improved hopefully over time. So, for example, there are some spacing issues with the ad. I would personally prefer to have the ability to go full screen, so you can actually see the whole thing in one huge column, and have the ads sort of on a horizontal row rather than on the left hand side, because when you're going and looking at a huge piece of documentation and you've got a handful of ads that go on the right hand side, you've then got lots of leftover dead space on the right underneath the ads, and I think that could be used better if the screen real estate was used better. But I am no design dude. I am no sort of creative guy. So what do I know? What do I know? Something that I've always wished Symfony had was a search feature in their documentation, something a little similar to perhaps Tailwind CSS search feature. And I was thinking about how this may happen if it was, how possible it could be. And one idea I had was potentially putting the documentation into Elasticsearch and then searching Elasticsearch. But there's a lot of DevOps involved there. There's a lot of infrastructure stuff required for that. But I think that would be very good, because then you could even search through the code snippets as well for keywords or whatever, and it would return the articles that are scored the highest because of the frequencies that that you have set in terms of, like, is it in the title, is it in the description, is it in the code snippet, what is the frequency of this search term, that kind of jazz. You can get quite granular with Elasticsearch. You can tell that I'm a bit of an Elasticsearch geek myself. Okay, so that's the first piece of news. I think Symfony's done a great job with their documentation. I do think it can be improved, but initially I think it's a step in the right direction. Okay, the second piece of news isn't so happy and light. It's an article that I read last week regarding this thing that I never even knew existed. However, it just makes sense that it exists, I guess, in a sort of a negative sense, and that is package typo squatting. I mean, I had to look at through Google through Wikipedia to work this out. Typo squatting is where you have like you misspell something in order to catch people out, and then you prey upon people's human error, and you do things maliciously, shall we say, because you've caught them in your trap. Now, there is an article here. I'll just read a couple of bits. It is an article from Kernel Mode. Okay, kernelmode.blog. I'll leave links of all of these things, including the Symfony documentation, in the show notes when I'm done with the podcast tonight. So this kernel mode blog article, typo squatting malware found in Composer repository. So it's quite a big thing. This was discovered by the author on the 8th of September 2021 as part of a greenfield project that he was doing. He discovered a malicious package in package.ist, which is the Composer package.ist, in the main Composer repository. This is a mistake that I would do. This is why it got me in the feels. So there is a Composer package, which is a Symfony component called Symfony process. And so the way the packages, it's a little bit like NPM. The way the packages are split up, you've got the organization or the repository, and then you've got a /, and then you've got the actual package name. So in this case, it's spelled Symfony /process. Okay, well, the malicious package is symfont /process. So they're preying on the fact that you're going to misspell Symfony by not putting in the Y and replacing that with a T. So symfont. Now, for anyone like myself who suffers from a wee bit of dyslexia, when you read symfont, you're actually thinking, that doesn't actually, that makes sense. That's okay. That's fine. That's all right. But you've got the / there. It kind of looks like the tail of the Y. Okay, so you can see how this can catch people out. Anyway, so this is a case of package typo squatting. It's to target users of that popular Symfony process package that I've just mentioned. This is the gotcha. It was downloaded more than 300 million times, according to this article. Huge amount. And the article goes on and talks about, sorry, that was a mouse getting too sensitive. It talks about what it does. So after installing the package, a victim would need to create a process instance, which you would normally do if you were using the Symfony process package. So you would create a process instance using the new Symfony process namespace. Symfony process is a simple class that randomly phones home. This is the gotcha. It randomly phones home home to a website, which is yls333.com/dev.php. So even the URL address looks sort of legit in the fact that it's got /dev/PHP. So this is a massive issue, as you can tell. And what happens is when it phones home, it takes all of the things in the server global variable and sends it to that website. And so that website now has all the things that the server has, including including the important details like the IP, the port, the host name of the compromised server, and obviously more, because the server variable holds a ton of information. Okay, so the author here went into more depth in terms of discovering where the domain is registered, and found that it was registered in Beijing. Once the bad actor is notified that a site has installed their malicious package, they can then visit the site, passing along a special string in the URL, which is a sort of an MD5 hash, and bad things will happen. Now, he has mentioned that the author of this article has mentioned that the author of this malicious package is from China, as I've mentioned, and goes by the name of, now I'm really terrible at naming names, Hainan Ping. He's located in Guangzhou in China and appears to be an active PHP developer. Now, this is just going by the author, so I've done no more research than this, and I'll leave a link in the show notes below in the description. But as you can imagine, this is a massive deal, because this, it's sending off your server superglobal variable to this website, and as the article mentions, it's been downloaded, this package, over 300 million times. So my advice to anybody who uses PHP and definitely uses Symfony, or knows that they're using a library that relies on Symfony, please do get very granular in inspecting your packages. There is a command that I will just find, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but there is a command that you can run in Composer to list all of the packages and what they depend on. I will find that out, and I'll send a tweet or something at How to Code Well on Twitter on how to do that. And you're looking out for, I'll just name it again, this package, Symfont, spelt SYMFONT/process. If you find that in your project, remove it quickly, please, and you should be good. And you should be good. Remove it and then redeploy everything. Yeah, this goes into more information in terms of like the hashing and other bits and pieces, and then some bits around the DNS investigation stuff that the author has done. I'll leave a link. I won't go into too much detail here, but I'll leave a link in the show notes after the show. Right, now let's get on to some happier things, shall we? Let's get on to some happier things. The first one is, the first three are questions and answers, questions from the audience. So what I've done is I've randomly picked 3 questions from YouTube comments over the previous handful of videos, and I'm going to answer them now. I have glanced at them. So I haven't done a huge amount of research, but we will see how we go. And I do apologize, because I will be saying the names of these commenters, and I will probably get them wrong. So the first one is Omar Kandel. Okay, this was a question on the last podcast where I mentioned Swole, and Omar's asking, I heard PHP Swole is faster than Node.js. Now, I don't know that for a fact, so I'm not entirely sure. But I found React PHP. Which one should I learn? Swole PHP or React PHP. So these are two things that I don't know. First of all, I don't know whether Swole is faster than Node.js. I guess it really depends on what it is that you need to have some sort of control test. I mean, saying one language is faster than the other language, it's like saying, well, one car is faster than the other car, but one car could be faster going around the corners, and the other car could be going faster around the straights. You need to have some form of side-by-side test doing the same thing, and those kind of tests are things like doing big loops over things, and one might be faster, one might be memory efficient. Just because one is faster than the other doesn't mean that it's better. Now, I've never heard of React PHP. Is this a framework? I will do a little bit of digging and find that out, but I'll be interested to know what that is. React PHP. I don't know. I'm not sure. So I'm going to have to leave that question as a kind of in the air sort of thing. I'll get back to it when I do some more proper research. Okay, number 2. Now this is going to be this is a difficult name to pronounce, so please, I do apologize. I'm just going to call you David. This was a question that was on a live stream, and that your surname is David, so let's use that. This was on a live stream on my general maintenance. Basically, one stream I did a while back was that I wanted to do some maintenance on the howtocodewell.net website, and I just decided to live stream it. And that included upgrades to Symfony and other bits and pieces, doing some unit tests and making sure the code coverage was decent, all of that kind of, just general maintaining the code, making sure versions were up to date, all of that jazz. Anyway, David mentions, it's always good to watch someone else's thought process on something. Thanks. Please, can you do a tutorial on tests, the whole acceptance test, integration tests, and all? Now, for those that don't watch the live streams, and they do go on, so I do appreciate that not everyone's got the time to watch a 3-hour live stream. In those streams, I do a lot of testing. I do a lot of acceptance testing. I do a lot of integration testing. I do a lot of unit testing. These are when I'm working on the How to Code Well sites, so howtocodewell.net and the howtocodewell.fm sites. I try as hard as I possibly can, although it doesn't always work. In fact, it hardly ever works very well. But I try to do TDD. I am getting better, I feel, at TDD, which is test-driven design, which means that I would write my tests first before I actually go ahead and write the code. And then I would use the test to then back up that what I've created actually works. And then I would refactor that and then retest it and rinse and repeat, that kind of jazz. So I'm not sure whether I will be doing like a full-on this is how you test stuff, because anyone who jumps into the stream, I will probably be testing stuff there anyway. But what I'm considering doing is I have, in the last live stream I was doing, I was actually planning a course that I want to do, a programming course that I want to do, and I want to get it ready for some point in the early next year. And I was building the GitHub repository of a template repository of a generic course. These are the README files. This is the installation file. This is the documentation that goes around a project. It's a project file, a project that I would be pushing out on howtocodewell.net. And because these are projects, not your typical courses, in the sense that I'm just going to be teaching you some syntax of PHP or JavaScript. These are actually projects that you can build and use. I do feel like I should approach them like I would approach an ordinary project of mine, which would require unit tests, which would require some form of testing. So I'm thinking, I mean, I haven't really formulated the plan well yet, but what I'm thinking is when I do these courses, I'm thinking of providing an element of those courses to testing that project as the project develops. Obviously, what I need to do is build the project, because what I do is I build the course or the project, and then what I do is then rebuild that and video myself doing it. So I know it. I already know it works because I've already written the code. That's basically it's like writing your script essentially, and part of that would be testing the thing. So maybe I will be doing so what I'm trying to say is maybe my projects and my courses that I do next year will have an element of testing to them. It's not necessarily going to be like this is how you test things, in a generic sense. It's going to be this is how you test this thing that we're doing, and I might be doing a bit of TDD in there. Who knows? Okay, so the next question is from a long-time listener of ours. It's Martin958, and this is on my JavaScript array tutorial, or one of my JavaScript array tutorials. And Martin asks, how are the callback function parameters of item : string, index : number, and array : string in brackets all recognized as keywords? So what you've defined there is a function signature or a method signature or a class signature, however you want to look at it. Wherever it's a language construct that you have identified there. And these are special keywords. Well, they're not this is so they're not really keywords. They are method signatures. So let's say, for instance, now I'm gonna just lean on PHP here, but it's the same in any language. So you would have let's say in array. Okay, let's say in array, one of the PHP functions, the built-in functions of PHP. It knows that you need a needle and you need a haystack. And your IDE will pick that up. It will tell you need a needle and you need a haystack. And I think there's a third parameter as well. And the IDE will know if it's a string, if it's a Boolean, the parameter, because the parameter has been defined by the language in the very core parts of the language. Actually, if you go into PHP Storm, or if you're a JavaScript developer, this question is more centered around JavaScript. If you use an IDE that supports the language that you're working on and has auto-completion, you can actually use auto-completion. The IDE will know the things that you need to add into those function calls, into that method signature, because it is aware of the language. And even with PHP, if you press, I think it's either Control click or something. If you click on the actual method name, you'll actually go to the documentation of PHP, the underlying documentation of PHP, and it'll tell you how tell you the signature, and it'll give you a bit of documentation. It'll tell you what the parameters should be for each one of the or the parameter values of each one of the parameters in that signature. It'll also tell you the return and all of that jazz. So what I'm trying to say is these language constructs are built into the language. I probably shouldn't keep saying language constructs. I mean, they are functions after all, but these are in the language. They are defined in the language. And obviously with PHP, it's not, PHP isn't written in PHP, of course, so it's the underlying language that is PHP is compiled from. That is where that goes. I hope those have answered your questions. I do apologize for the first one, Omar. I will find out more about React PHP, but in due course. One thing I should mention, though, before we get into the Apple funness, is that the new howtocodewell.fm site will, when it gets live, will have a contact page. So not only will you be able to just send me messages on YouTube in the comments, but you will also be able to send me an actual email, and you'll be able to have questions and suggestions and all of that jazz. There is, of course, howtocodewell.net/Discord if you prefer using Discord. And you can ask me questions there too. Okie dokie. So Monday was fun. Monday there was this little event, just a wee little event that happened at Apple. I have finally done it. I've finally pulled the trigger, and I finally got myself a MacBook Pro to replace the one that I'm currently using, which is I think it's downstairs charging. And the problem I have with my MacBook Pro is that it maxes out at 16 gigabytes of RAM. That is the underlying problem that I am facing. 16 gigabytes of RAM, it really isn't that much. When you start thinking about, all the RAM that everything else uses that isn't the code, so Chrome, so your IDE, so your SQL analyzer, whatever that is, Docker, for instance. It's huge. And then you've got the containers on top of that. You've got all your containers. And I use a ton of containers every day. And they are so hungry. I mentioned earlier Elasticsearch. That is incredibly hungry. I used to be able to edit my videos on my MacBook Pro, but since, I don't know, a year or so ago, I haven't been able to do that because in my opinion, I think Premiere Pro did an update and basically just said my machine wasn't good enough. And I find that I can't scrub on the timeline. So not only am I looking for a new MacBook Pro for coding and giving more gigabytes of memory to Docker, because at the moment I literally have megabytes left. It really is that bad. But I'm also looking for a machine where I can actually do video editing. And I was able, back in the day when I was doing the Docker in Motion course for Manning Publications, I was actually editing some of those videos on the train to see a client. That's how efficient I was able to efficient the MacBook Pro was, the thing that I had. Ever since the recent updates of the operating system and Premiere Pro, I believe it's a combination of the two, things started to get really sluggish and slow. And then obviously just the general accumulation of files and whatnot and startup applications and stuff really just took a toll on the application. And it got to a point where there were things that I couldn't turn off because I needed them, Docker, for instance. And when I'm doing like the Manning Publications thing, I needed to use Docker at the same time as I was using Premiere Pro. And you can and then you would need Chrome open to do your research with, and then you had your notes open to do your note taking, your script writing, and all of that jazz. You had Slack open because you were talking to the editors and all of that jazz. It was just took my machine to a standstill essentially. But I remember a time when that was acceptable. I could do that perfectly fine, but for some reason over the years it just started to die. So I was looking for something that was at least 32 gigs of RAM, if not 64 gigs of RAM. I've always been pretty nervous with the M1s because of the support, the kind of trade-offs that you have to do, the compromises that you have to make with things like Rosetta 2, and the fact that some of the Docker images aren't supported, and there are a shopping list of other things that Docker might not do because of M1, because they will hopefully get to fix those issues in time, but there's still, let's just say, there's still a few teething problems with M1. So I decided that I shouldn't be an early adopter. I was seriously thinking about pulling the trigger when the M1 came out, and I was really looking at the MacBook Air. Even though that had 16 gigs of RAM, I was thinking, well, you know, because it's silicon, it'll be more efficient, and therefore the problems that I'm seeing with my 16 gigs of RAM right now might be something that I won't be seeing with M1. But I decided against it purely because of the 16 gigs of RAM. So yeah, anyway, I decided to pull the trigger. I actually got the highest end machine. It's a 16 gig job. Sorry, it's a 16-inch M1 Max. I'll talk about it more in just a second, but let's just go through some of the highlights of what happened. So, in my opinion, it would seem like there was two halves of their Pro lineup. The first one is what they call power to go, and the second one is supercharged for pros. So, from a marketing standpoint, that's interesting. They've seemed to have sort of created this divide, and the first divide is whether you want to be able to have decent amount of power on the go in a sort of a mobile type-esque kind of way, or whether you're supercharged for pros, being the fact that you're going to be sort of plugged in to lots of things, and we'll get onto that in just a second. And you know, you're not going to be moving about into various different coffee shops because of this supercharged thing. So some good things that happened. The battery didn't shrink, so you can still use them on planes, which is great. They added back the ports, so they have added the SD card port, which is just wonderful. It's so good to have that back. And also MagSafe. However, I have some concerns. I've got some possible concerns that I'll go through after this. They made some trade-offs with weight and size. So typically, Apple have always downsized things to make them more slicker, which has, in some cases, especially in my version of the Intel-based one, when it starts to throttle, you can certainly feel the thermals coming in, and you can hear the fans going nuts. So they have compromised and said, well, you know, in order to have this M1 Max, it needs to be thicker and it needs to be heavier, which in my case, in my opinion, I've got no problem with. That seems perfectly fine to me. In fact, it could be as thick as it wants to be. I'm not going to lug this around all the time. So that's perfectly fine. And they're light enough. They're light enough. They added 1080p to the webcam, which is something that should have happened ages ago, in my opinion. They make some really good mobile phone cameras, so I don't understand why they can make something that small, that good, and then have a laptop and not be able to put that in that laptop. So they did that, but it comes with a notch. Now, I'm really not fussed with the notch at all. It doesn't really bother me. You don't get less of a screen. You actually get more of a screen. If you think of it like, so it's a 16 by 10 screen, regardless of that notch. And if you think of the left and the right sides as kind of like ears to the notch, or ears to the screen, if that makes sense. It'll be interesting to know how especially with Premiere Pro, where you've got a big list of menu bar items. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out with it. And I mean, I've mentioned Premiere Pro a few times. I'm actually thinking of just pulling the plug and going with Final Cut, because I think Final Cut will be better for video editing, in the sense of it will be working with the silicon better, in my opinion, than Premiere Pro. It always feels like Premiere Pro is having to keep up, whereas Final Cut seems to be there out the gate. However, there's going to be a lot of relearning with that, of course. Okay, so the Pros still come with fans, which is perfectly fine in my opinion. You know, if they're huge machines, if they want to turn the fans on, that's perfectly fine. I don't care about fan noise; it's fine. They've got the MagSafe and USB-C charging, so that's cool. The Max allows for 7 streams of 8K video. So I mentioned earlier about video production that I do. I guess one thing that I haven't done in a while is a lot of videos, a lot of tutorials, and this is partly because the machines that I've got don't allow for that kind of compute power, unfortunately. However, this machine will, that I've got, because it's the Max. It has the 400 gigabyte memory bandwidth. It allows for 4 monitors to be connected, which is nuts. So that'll be good. It also these things also have better Magic keyboards, and Touch ID has the touch bar has gone, but Touch ID is still there, which is awesome. You can also get the M1 Pro, sorry, the M1 Max. The naming conventions are mad. The MacBook Pro M1 Max. You can also get that in the 14-inch. However, I'm not sure how that's going to compare to the 16-inch because of the surface area of maybe the thermals. I don't know how that will throttle compared to the 16. So yeah, I decided to go for the big caboodle. It's a 16-inch. It's 10-core CPU, 32-core GPU, 64 gigs of unified memory, and I've decided to go for a 4 terabyte jobby hard drive because I saw this as a great video editing machine. So I am hoping to do some more editing on that, and I think because it's the laptop form factor, it does offer itself to doing some work not inside this office, which is great. I'm really looking forward to doing that again, which is good. There are some concerns. I have concerns with this. I mean, it's not all rainbows and sunshine. So the first one is that my first M1 MacBook. This is my first M1 MacBook. This is new uncharted territory for me. So I didn't go for the M1 when it came out. I waited in the weeds to work out what they were coming out with next, because I just didn't trust it. And I'm not 100% sure what ARM support the certain Docker images that I use, and I use a lot, will have with M1. I don't know. I'm not sure. That's something that I'm going to have to test and try out, but I will report back what images do work and what images don't work, the problems that I've had with Rosetta 2 and all of that jazz. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a fun few learning curve, a good few months. I'm not sure how the battery will handle both USB-C charging and MagSafe charging. So I connect my current MacBook Pro to my ultra-wide Dell monitor here, and that automatically charges the MacBook Pro, and it can be a bit of a problem because you don't want to keep charging something when it's 100% charged. I wish there was a way of actually telling this monitor, hey, stop charging now, just receive data, stop sending power to this thing. So I'm interested to know how the MagSafe and the USB-C charging will work. This machine can connect to 4 monitors, the 16-inch jobby, the Max job, whereas the Pro can only connect to 3, I believe. But does that mean that all of these monitors will charge the laptop, or will it prioritize certain USB ports that are connected to certain power outlets, whether they're actually power outlets or whether they're actually monitors that give off power? Will they be intelligent enough to go, actually, we're only going to get it from this source, we're not going to get it from other sources, because I don't want to ruin this laptop. I see this as a 4-year plus workhorse of mine. So I really do not want to screw up the battery just because I've plugged it into multiple monitors. So talking about why did I get this machine in the end, it's because of video editing and my resource-hungry Docker containers, as well as future-proofing. So I want to see this as a 4+ year workhorse, and I can finally edit videos again on my laptop, which opens up lots of different workflows for me, which is brilliant. Going back to my possible concerns, we mentioned about the architecture for Docker images, and I've also mentioned a couple of times today about the other things that Docker needs to work through for the M1, and the battery. There's also a concern I've got around Rosetta 2. I've never used it. I've heard of people having to do various different tweaks and changes and remind themselves of when they're using a Rosetta 2 app and when they're not, and all that jazz. So I don't know what tools that I'm currently using. I'm not sure what requires Rosetta 2. I'm hoping that because the M1, and this is partly why I didn't jump on the M1 bandwagon right at the start, I'm hoping that it's been around for so long that actually the majority of the tools that I use are compatible. That's my hope. Okay, how does the SSD support Docker file systems? So the SSDs are far better in terms of bandwidth and write speed compared to what they used to be. And I'm interested to know how that affects the Docker file system. If you have ever used Docker with a Mac, you'll know that the file system is not as good as Linux at all. And there's a ton of problems I do get where I have to just restart the container or restart the Docker machine or whatever I'm doing, because the file system on my Mac hasn't updated the file system in the Docker system file area quick enough. And that can be a problem when you're working on codes, snippets of files, or an area that I do get sometimes is when I'm doing a big composer install and I've got my IDE open and my IDE is trying to index these files as they're being installed by the Docker container. And so the files are going into the Docker container. They're also bind mounted onto the file system, and my IDE is trying to index them whilst this is all happening. It can get into a bit of a tiz. But because these SSDs are far faster to read, and also the bandwidth of the memory bandwidth is far greater. We're talking here, the max is 400 gigabyte memory bandwidth. What kind of effect does that have on file system read and writes? Okay, and also, will the delivery get pushed out due to shortages? Now, because I chosen the 4 terabyte version of it, not the standard, I think it was 512. I believe, because I chose the 4 terabyte and not the 512 megabyte job, I have to wait for it to be built and then shipped. And I am probably looking at the 2nd, but more than likely the 3rd week of November for it to arrive. So that's going to be a fun little thing for me to do when it comes. But I can't wait for it. I really can't. And I'm hoping that this will enable me to do a lot more content for the How to Code Well YouTube channel. youtube.com/howtocodewell if you don't know. And do some of these projects and these courses that I've got planned for. So yes, this is good. Now, I want to end this by saying that you do not need this machine to write code. It's certainly not. I am a video editor as well as a coder, and the sort of the niche that I'm in terms of coding requires a lot of resource. It's a lot of really hungry, and I own my business. I'm a contractor, and I cannot go to somewhere and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have enough hard drive space," or "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't run this because I don't have enough memory." So this is where my business hat comes on and goes, well, what are the things that I could possibly get myself into in 4 years' time? What are the requirements of these things? And 64 gigs of RAM might seem huge, and it is, but it's all the other things around the stuff that I do, like I said, the Chrome tabs, the IDE stuff, InVision, all of the stuff that is just so resource hungry. various NPM installs that I have to do, lots of scripts that I have to run. I have scripts that I run literally overnight because they take so long. So all of this, if I can do a little bit faster, then it will enable me to do more. But if you are just starting out, as a developer, seriously, you don't need this. You do not need this. I started out, I had an Acer laptop, and I was using it until the hinges fell off of the screen. And I also had a Toshiba laptop. I was a Windows guy for a long time. I then learnt a bit of Linux, and then I learnt, I started on Mac. I built a couple of Mac apps back in the day, and I've been a Mac stroke Linux user ever since. And the job that I have, as I mentioned, has a lot of containers that are very resource hungry. Plus, I'm a video editor, hence the huge amount of disk space that I've got myself. So yes, that's how I'm justifying it to my wallet. Anyway, thank you ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everybody, and I will be seeing you again very, very shortly. Take care. Bye-bye. Cheers.